Hey everybody, it's Mr. Wagstaff. Cool stuff to talk about today as we start a new unit on deciding governmental power. You guys are going to like this. This is really cool. There's ways, I think there's a lot of ways to teach this, and it'd be really boring. Lucky for y'all, you got this guy, and this stuff is actually really cool, and I think you're really going to like it. And anyway, let's go ahead and get into it. So, we have George Washington as the first president. He's created a cabinet that we're getting ready to talk about here in a second. But this whole unit is really going to be on deciding how much power the federal government is going to have. The federal government is the constant all the way through. So while the state governments and the federal governments are supposed to work together, and they do in large part, like present day, even though you hear about like the president talking about education and stuff, education is almost exclusively done by the state governments, and that's what a lot of your state taxes pay for is their state education. So education can vary around the states. The federal government affects everything equally. So education isn't really something the federal government deals with, but they will deal with like the military. That's kind of a federal government thing. Since this class is about American history, something that encompasses all states, we focus a whole lot on the federal government. The only downside to focusing so much on the federal government in this course is the fact that a lot of times, and you see it in society, once people leave school, they've learned so much about the federal government, all right, with like Abraham Lincoln and all these people. They start having this belief that the federal government is so much drastically stronger than the state governments, and that's not really the case, and it's clarified in the Constitution. So just want to put that out there as we talk about the federal power, what the federal government can or can't do. Understand, up to present day, in the Constitution, that the federal government and the state governments are supposed to share power. We're going to see the very first issues that are going to arise here in the late 1700s, early 1800s in this unit, when they're trying to fill out where that line is, meaning like the presidents and the federal government, where can they go, who has the right to do what. When there's an issue, who gets the final say-so? Is it the state governments or the federal governments? Because in the Constitution, under this concept of federalism, they're just supposed to work together. That's what it says. Very vague. That can mean a whole bunch of different things. It does not say one has the final say-so over the other, except in very specific circumstances. So, we're going to start talking about governmental power today. The guys here on the screen, other than me, hey, all right, the guys on the screen are presidents who are pivotal in really expanding or questioning governmental power. The federal government has gotten stronger over time. All right. Not necessarily aggressively taking power from the states, but again, I'm going to start trying to simplify it for you, and then it gets too complicated. So ignore that last statement. So here's who these guys are and how they affected governmental power, just a precursor as we go in. This is George Washington. We're going to talk a lot about him today. Everything he did affected governmental power because nobody had done anything before him. So everything he does sets a precedent, and we're going to start talking about him today. This is Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln comes out and basically makes slavery illegal by the end of the Civil War with the 13th Amendment. Does the federal government have the right to tell a state whether or not they can have slavery? That is a huge issue that we're going to discuss in great detail in this course as a whole. He's going to eventually say, yeah, the federal government does have that opinion, and there's going to be an entire war over it where 600,000 Americans are going to die. Like over 500,000 Americans are going to die in a war, which in large part, while it's 100% over slavery, absolutely, without slavery, the Civil War doesn't happen. Let me always clarify that. It is over, does the federal government have the right to tell a state what it can or can't do? All right. Involving slavery. There is no other issue the Civil War would have been fought over other than slavery. Civil War 100% over slavery. This guy here, this is FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He is the president during the Great Depression and World War II. Only president to serve more than 2 terms. Served 4 consecutive terms until he died of natural causes in his 4th term. Probably had more power in the modern era, if you count the 1900s as the modern era, than any other president that we've had. Richard Nixon claimed he was above the law. All right, and the American people were like, nah, you're not. And he ends up quitting. Only president that quit, but a lot of it came down to his abuse of power and thinking he could do more than he could, especially with like the legal system once he got in trouble for tampering with an election or attempting to tamper with an election. This is Lyndon B. Johnson. You may not be familiar with him. He goes by the initials LBJ a lot. He took over after Kennedy was assassinated. He's the president that was in charge during the Vietnam War, which gave the president ridiculous powers with the War Powers Act or afterwards. And without Congress gave up their ability to withdraw troops. So the Vietnam War completely on his shoulders, and he was miserable. Congress was miserable because they'd given up too much power, and then they're going to eventually take that power back afterwards. But they kind of see where, even with the military, that the president has too much power, that it can be a no-win situation if there's a bad decision. And this is George W. Bush. H.W. Bush was his dad in the early 90s. This is the president during September 11th, 2001 when it happened. There's going to be wars with Iraq and Afghanistan after that, in large part towards the mentality of America of being proactive, or instead of being reactive, wait for somebody to attack us and then react. We started doing stuff like preemptive strikes, which is we started invading countries hadn't done anything to us yet because we think they might do things to us in the future. So we're defending ourselves from their future actions. So there's a lot of questions over, wait, you can't attack a country before they do anything. Like, I bet they will. So that's some of the questions that we'll start getting into the modern era when we get into American II. All right. Creating a national government. So, George Washington, he's going to create a cabinet. All right, let me move myself up here. So, this is all the original G-dub, all right, George Washington. His Secretary of War. So, this is his cabinet, all right. These are the dudes right here. I didn't mention the Attorney General, Edmund Randolph. You don't really need to know him for this course, for the survey course. But he's the other part of this cabinet. So a cabinet are a group of guys that help George Washington run the country. So they're in charge of parts of the country, and then he manages them. That is the best way of describing it. So George Washington is the president of the United States. His Secretary of War is a guy named Henry Knox. So somebody wants to mess with us, Henry Knox is the dude that wrecked shop on it. Secretary of Treasury is Alexander Hamilton, and we're going to talk about him a lot starting today. And the Secretary of State is Thomas Jefferson. And we're also going to talk about him a lot starting today. These two guys have a very interesting story that connects them over multiple lessons here. So he creates this cabinet, and the question becomes, how are you going to run the country? Well, one of the very first things that we got to deal with, or I say we, them, specifically Alexander Hamilton, is this idea of a debt. The debt after the Revolutionary War. You can't see this at the bottom. I can tell where I've cut this thing off. At the very bottom here, this number that is, again, at the very bottom down here, that says 80 million. So that's kind of the adding up all of this stuff. So after the war's over, we're our own country, George Washington's the president, we owe a ton of money, all right? We owe France, Spain, and other countries that helped us out with the Revolutionary War. For simplicity's sake, I was using 13 million in the last unit, so it's easily divided up among the states so I can tell my story so you can understand the concept. But the number is actually bigger than that. And this is in the 1700s. That's a ton of money. So the country owes $80 million one way or other. All right. How are you going to pay that back? Under the Articles of Confederation, there really wasn't a way to pay it back. So Alexander Hamilton, he comes out, and his job is to find a way to start paying off the debt. It does not mean he has to go get $80 million by Tuesday, kind of thing. But what he has to do is he has to start making payments, all right? When you make payments on stuff, anybody that has loaned you money is cool. You may still owe them a whole bunch more money, but if you're gradually making payments, they like you because they are confident that you're going to keep paying them. Then as long as you keep making payments to them, say you need more money for something, that country will actually loan you more money as long as you make your payments. Making your payments whether it's a country or in life, incredibly important. Got to make your payments in life. Can't miss payments. Bad things happen with the way a society works on credit. Got to always make your payments. Deep thoughts with Wagstaff. All right. So, what Alexander Hamilton is going to do, and this is obvious. I mean, we created a constitution in large part because of this of fair taxing. He's going to nationalize this debt. Instead of having like all the debt spread out and the states having to pay their own section, everybody in the country is going to pay the same rate across the board. That way it's fair to everybody. Now, granted, states like Rhode Island and North Carolina, very grumpy about that because they had spent so much of their money paying back their debt to France already, and now they have to kind of double it up. But it's, you know, things aren't always perfect, and that is a thing that North Carolina and Rhode Island are going to have to deal with now. So why did the Americans immediately have to nationalize their debt, and who do we owe money to? So basically this is asking you, why does America need better taxing practices, right? Why do we have to nationalize it? Like, what was the problems with the Articles of Confederation? What wasn't happening? What do we need to have done? Why did we have to nationalize it? All right. So pause me here, answer that, and then we're going to move on. All right. So creating a national government continued. So some states had paid off their debts under the Articles of Confederation, as we had talked about with North Carolina. We had talked about this with Rhode Island. They had paid off their debts. Hamilton is going to actually be a big catalyst, a big motivator for the reason that the capital is going to get moved from, and it was alternating between New York City and Philadelphia. It was mainly Philadelphia while George Washington was president, down to the official capital, which will be Washington, D.C., which is the home. It was land given to the country by George Washington. Hamilton will move it down there. The reason it gets moved to the South, in large part, it's, you know, acknowledging North Carolina is getting kind of messed up about this. North Carolina, while they're furious about having to nationalize the debt because they have to pay more, they did still show up to the Constitutional Convention. So kind of as a, I don't know if a thank you or a, you know, halfway, I don't know, they're going to give North Carolina the, they are going to move the capital further south in respect of North Carolina, knowing North Carolina is getting messed up with this nationalizing the debt after they'd already paid off their debt. So they have to pay it again, basically. So he's going to move it down south. He is going to create two things here that are really important in trying to raise money. So not only does he have to nationalize the debt, he's got to figure out how to make more money. So he has the ability to tax. So Alexander Hamilton is like, how do we make money? So once he taxes everybody, he's like, all right, everybody give me, you know, your tax money. Well, everybody writes him a check and they show up and they give him tax money. Now, when he gets this tax money, he didn't really expect to just open his mailbox one day and have $3 million sitting in there, right? He's like, oh, all right. So what's he going to do with this money while, you know, he waits to make payments to France and all this other stuff? Does he just go put it in the big piggy bank, you know, in the Capitol and wait to pay it? So he's like, what if, I make a national bank? Right? A bank run by the United States, and I deposit this money into the bank. All right? I'm going to talk about here in a minute how the national bank works, but it is a way for him to make money for the United States. All right? So when you create a bank, if you have money like he does, because he has taxpayer money, then there is a very effective way of gaining new money for the United States. So he creates a national bank. It's actually, sounds boring. It's actually going to be really cool. All right? And then he's going to use tariffs, which are tax on imported goods. So this here is Alexander Hamilton. He's Secretary of Treasury. He's the money guy. All right. So he's going to create tariffs. Here's how the tariffs are going to work. Oh, my watch is coming off. All right. There we go. Here's how a tariff works. Say cloth, and this is a great example here because textiles were big at the time, which would be cloth. America makes cloth, costs $4. Britain makes cloth costs $4. So when Britain wants to sell cloth in America, who are they competing with? With American made cloth. And these are Americans who need you to buy their cloth and not foreign cloth. All right. Now, what Hamilton does is creates a tariff. A tariff is a tax on imports. So that cloth, that's $4 in Britain. Once it comes over, there is a tax put on it. All right. So the cloth over here is $5 a roll in the United States. This does a couple things. If you buy British cloth in America, you're paying taxes to the American government. Great. If you don't buy British cloth and you buy American cloth, you're helping American businesses. So it's a win-win either way. So he starts putting these tariffs on. Now, there are some downsides to tariffs. What happened to the price of British goods? They went up. So if you're a poor person, goods just seem to have increased in price. In addition to, once we put taxes on stuff coming from England, when we ship stuff to England, they typically also are going to increase the prices, making it harder for us to sell our stuff other places. But it's give and take. And then he's going to create what's called the First National Bank. Oh, and this is getting ready to cause a bunch of drama. All right. So Alexander Hamilton creates the National Bank, 1791. He creates, this is an actual building. All right. So the National Bank, all the tax money that he is getting, he is going to put it in the National Bank. All right. And the goal is to pay off the Revolutionary War debt. Everything seems fine, and we're getting ready to start talking about how this is going to lead to some crazy drama. So the question is, other than nationalizing the debt, what were the two other ways in which Alexander Hamilton was going to gain money for the United States government? All right. So explain that. Don't just list two things. Tell me what they are. All right. In two complete sentences. So pause that if you need to, and I'm going to move on. All right. The National Bank. So here's the problem with the National Bank, or I'll explain it to you. There's not really a problem with it, but let me explain how banks work. So if you go to the bank and you have $500 and you're like, I don't want to keep this in my wallet, I'm going to put it in my banking account, in my checking account. So you go to the bank, give them your money, and they're like, all right, that's cool. You leave it there. It should be free. You should never have to pay banking fees. It's ridiculous that they do that. That's a money grab on their part. But so you go into this big fancy building, there's marble and everything's really expensive, and you go and you give them your $500 and they're like, all right, cool, thank you. And then whenever you want that money, you can go back to the bank, get your money out, use a debit card, you can write a check, anything like that present day. It should not cost you anything to do any of that. Have you ever wondered why? Why is it free to put your money in the bank? They're giving you these debit cards. There's these big, how are they making money? Here's how. Here's how banks make money. And this is pivotal as we talk about financing throughout America 1 and American 2. When you put your money in a bank, they are not taking your money and putting it in a little box in the back, waiting for you to come back so they can go get your money out of your box. They're going to take your money and they're going to chuck it over their shoulder into a big old pile of money they have in the back with everybody else. Figuratively, they don't actually have a big pile of money in the back. That's not how it works modern day. Don't try to rob a bank, please. So, but figuratively, they're going to throw it over the shoulder in a big pile of everybody's money. They keep really good records. So if you put $500 in and you come back and you want $20, they look at the records. Okay, that's fine. They go into the big pile of money and grab $20 and hand it to you. It ain't your money. It's in a big pile in the back. All right, you with me so far? So what the banks do is they will give people loans out of that big pile of money. They may even loan out 90% of that money. Give that money to other people. Now, whose money is that? It's everybody's money. But they will give loans out to other people. All right? So why would a bank loan money out? Because guess what those people will do? They will eventually pay that money back plus interest. Interest is like thank you money. The interest is how banks make money. So banks make money by loaning out your money to other people, and then they get that money back, your money back, plus thank you money that the bank gets to keep. That is how banks work, all right? By loaning out your money to other people. So, banks make bank, all right? They make a lot of money. And here's how. And I'll go back to Alexander Hamilton here. He creates a national bank. Everybody sends him millions of dollars. All of a sudden, he has millions of dollars. He's like, hey, let's make a bank out of this. So he goes and puts it in the bank. It's everybody's tax money is laying there in a big pile. Money that they've paid in taxes to the government. So you know what the government does with that money? They give it back to the people in loans. Oh, do you need a loan for a farm? Okay, well, here's some money. You have to pay it back to me, though, with interest. So they are literally loaning people their own tax money back to pay back to the government with interest. All right. So to Alexander Hamilton, this is great. He's helping people out. People need loans, right? They got to pay taxes. They have to have loans. So the idea of a national bank all of a sudden makes the most powerful people in the country the government. Because you know who has the biggest bank in America is the American government. All of a sudden, the federal government, which when they pass the Constitution, like it's going to be really small, it's only going to do a little bit. All of a sudden, once the government is set up, they create a national bank. When you're super rich, you're super powerful, and almost instantaneously, the national bank is the biggest bank in America, and the national government is extremely powerful. They can fund whatever they want. They can give loans to whatever they want, and they can choose not to give loans to whatever they want. Because of that amount of power, it starts making people feel really squirrely real early on here about how much power this new federal government has. Because again, King George terrified America as far as having a big, powerful government. The Constitution was supposed to, be representatives, keep the government in check. Now, all of a sudden, like 2 years in, boom, it got super powerful because it has all this money. So how would a national bank gain money for the United States and make it stronger at the same time? So we mentioned this, how it gains money for the United States. We already talked about that, so make sure you explain that. But how does it make it stronger? Because we're bigger in power. When you have money, you can pretty much do whatever you want. All right. You can, buy more troops. You can do whatever you want. So a big, powerful government is really scary to people because once the government gets so powerful, it really makes the people feel like they don't have the ability to stand up to the government anymore. All right. So answer that in complete sentences and pause me if you need. All right. So this is where junk starts getting real. Alexander Hamilton thinks this is a great idea. He's like, national bank, fantastic. Well, know who doesn't think it's a good idea? Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson is the Secretary of State. So he's like in the same building because they're actually in Philadelphia when all this takes place. He's like, wait, what happened? And they're like, yeah, Alexander Hamilton created a national bank. And Thomas Jefferson's like, he can't do that. And he storms down the hall, super grumpy. He storms down the hall, like goes into Hamilton's office and says, did you just create a national bank? And Alexander Hamilton's like, yeah, I did. And Thomas Jefferson, now keep in mind, let's set the stage here. Both of these men wrote the Constitution. These two men wrote it together. They got done with it. They high-fived each other. Great. All right. Both Federalists. So Thomas Jefferson's like, wait a minute. What? You can't make a national bank. And Alexander Hamilton's like, why not? And Thomas Jefferson's like, it's unconstitutional. And Alexander Hamilton's like, oh my gosh. Oh, I didn't want to do anything wrong. Okay. And he goes, grabs a copy of the Constitution. No, it's not. And Thomas Jefferson's like, yes, it is. It's clearly unconstitutional. And Alexander Hamilton's like looking at it. He's like, how? And Thomas Jefferson says, you show me in there, in that Constitution, where it says you're allowed to make a national bank. And Hamilton's like, it doesn't say anything about a national bank. And Thomas Jefferson's like, right. Since it doesn't say anything about a national bank, you can't make one. And Hamilton's like, that's not how that works. As long as it says I can't do it, I'm good. There's no rule against it. All of a sudden, you see two very different interpretations of the Constitution come out by two men who wrote it. It's really important because when people argue over the Constitution today about what the Founding Fathers meant, the Founding Fathers couldn't always agree on it. And this is a prime example of it. Thomas Jefferson is what's called a strict constructionist. All right. He's like, wait a minute. Unless it specifically says you're allowed to do it in the Constitution, you cannot. So Thomas Jefferson thinks the only thing the federal government is allowed to do are the very few things that is explicitly implied in the Constitution, the things that are actually said it can do. Hamilton is a loose constructionist. He's like, no, as long as it doesn't say I can't do it, I'm good. Like, don't be weird about this. So strict constructionists and loose constructionists are very different mentalities over the Constitution. You still see it today. But to clarify in better terms, a strict constructionist is kind of the type of person that would ask for permission before they do something. A loose constructionist is the type of person that's just going to do it and then ask for forgiveness later. All right. And kind of see if anybody stops them. So the two very different interpretations of the Constitution. Jefferson, I mean, these guys, and this is an ongoing battle. They're going to have this whole unit. They hate each other. Thomas Jefferson and Alexander Hamilton from this point on viciously dislike each other, like with a passion. They are arch nemesis. All right. They literally, I can't verify this for proof, but I imagine they probably got in fist fights. Just got straight up fist fights, and George Washington probably had to break them up. Hated each other so much that Thomas Jefferson, all right, in 1793, he is the first president or the first Secretary of State. He quits. He quits the Secretary. He's like, I'm done. I can't even be in the same building with Alexander Hamilton. It's kind of interesting because Thomas Jefferson is a Secretary of State that deals with other country, and Alexander Hamilton deals with banking. So I don't know why Thomas Jefferson's putting his nose where it doesn't belong, kind of, but they did both write the Constitution, and Thomas Jefferson 100% believes that the Federalists, so he's like, I'm no longer a Federalist. I'm not part of y'all anymore. Y'all are doing this is so wrong. You're going to lead this country down a wrong road. So he's like, middle fingers to everybody. I'm out, all right? And he quits, all right? So he claims he's going to spend more time with his family, but he must not like his family because he's back really quickly back into politics as an opposition to Alexander Hamilton and the people that come after George Washington. So this is a little thing here. It says, we need to create a national bank. This is Alexander Hamilton. All right. This is Alexander Hamilton wanted the federal government to be more powerful than the state's governments. Thomas Jefferson says, I disagree. I feel a national bank would be unconstitutional and give too much power to the federal government. Thomas Jefferson disagreed with Hamilton's idea of creating a national bank. Let me move this down here. Ooh. Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson had an argument because of their two different viewpoints. They look angry. This is this is Congress. We will give a 20-year charter on this national bank and then decide if we want to extend it. So that was kind of the compromise. They're going to let it go for 20 years. And then after 20 years, they're going to decide if it is going to stay or not. And Thomas Jefferson's furious. He's like, they don't have the right to do that. They don't have the right to, like, in his mind, break the Constitution for 20 years. So Congress gave Hamilton a 20-year charter on the national bank, and they would decide if they would extend that charter. But Jefferson said that Congress didn't have the right to do that according to the Constitution. Because, again, Jefferson's a strict constructionist. So here's George Washington being the mediator between these two people. And George Washington says, I agree with Congress and Hamilton that there should be a national bank. It will add more security to our economy. Oh, TJ here's grumpy about it. Hamilton's happy. The debate went to George Washington, where he agreed with Hamilton's plan. And then it became a thing for 20 years. Once that happens, Thomas Jefferson is going to quit. He is just furious about it. So this is a picture of Thomas Jefferson. This is a portrait. He's not actually red. It's just faded or whatever after hundreds of years. So it's a pretty accurate portrait, except for the color has really gotten off. So there's two questions here. What is the fundamental difference between someone who is a strict constructionist and someone who is a loose constructionist? So explain that between Thomas Jefferson and Alexander Hamilton. And then why is Thomas Jefferson so against Hamilton's idea to create the national bank? All right. That's as far as we're going to get in today's lesson. I'll see you guys tomorrow.